Beginning transmission. This is the Chaos Community Broadcast, a show about failures and how to navigate complex socio-technical systems so you can surf the chaos instead of succumbing to it. I'm your host, James Wickett. And for recording of this broadcast, as well as any of all of our previous broadcasts, you can type chaos.community into a web browser of your choice. You can also see our channel on YouTube. Now, if you would subscribe to our channel, you'll get access to the first content right when it comes out. Okay.
And I'm your other host, Casey Rosenthal. James, we got that. You didn't leave a room for me to do that. We can go back and fix that because you didn't leave room for me to.
Yeah, we'll fix that. Okay. So today we're continuing our series on the book, Chaos Engineering, System Resiliency and Practice. Today we have with us a contributing author to the book, Andy Fleener, who wrote the chapter on humanistic chaos. Andy, welcome to the show.
Thanks. Happy to be here.
Welcome to the show, Andy. You wrote chapter 10, Humanistic Chaos, which I've committed to memory. First of all, congratulations on being published. It's a fantastic book. I overheard one reader say that it's the best technical book of the 21st century, which surely is a disappointment to anybody who planned on writing a technical book for the next 80 years. But how does it feel to be such an accomplished author?
You know, it feels pretty good. I mean, it's the first time I've actually had anything published, so I was pretty excited about that, and seeing my name in print was pretty cool. I assume that review came from you. That's my guess.
We can edit that bit out, Casey.
Yeah, thank you. I actually want to start at the end of your chapter, just to get this out of the way, and then we can dive into your chapter in proper order. At the end of your chapter, you say that if you're not failing, you're not learning. And I was just wondering if you think the inverse of that is true, as is almost implied, because that would imply that James is the smartest person that I know, and that just doesn't seem like it holds water.
Don't answer that question, Andy. We're gonna cut that. Just a lot of edits so far. Hey, so Andy, in the book, in your chapter, you do say weak signals are small, barely visible indications of new emergent behavior of the system. So what do you mean by, when you talk about like organizational signals that are happening? Can you sort of unpack that for the audience as we're kind of diving in?
Yeah, sure. So signals in that concept, that idea, what I mean by signals are like just indications of things that are happening within any system. The sort of premise of the chapter is that an organization is a giant system of systems, and so what you're looking for within an organization is signals about things going wrong, things that are about to go wrong, things that are going right, things that are about to go right. And there are very, very strong signals when things go wrong. You don't. The thing that I'd like to talk about hunting for are weak signals that aren't super obvious, that are just right in your face, right? If somebody makes a big mistake and it costs a bunch of money, that's a pretty strong signal, right? But the weak signals are the interesting bits. They're everywhere. It's just a matter of if you can pick up on them or not. I think good examples. Todd Conklin likes to talk about the buffet line as a good example. If the buffet line is not in the right order, let's say the plates are at the wrong end of the buffet line, that's a weak signal that you're going to have a bad time trying to eat at the buffet. And it's sort of it's the affordances, to steal Norman's idea around how to use that system.
We're talking about salad bars again, James. So if you could get my order in, that would be appreciated. So humanistic chaos. Do you have an affinity for humans? Why did you choose them as a subject for study? Some would say that it's a bit narcissistic. Not me, but others.
Yeah, I mean, I've always been So the humanistic side of the title is really about me in that I like to think about the people involved in these systems, what the people see, what the people think about how they approach problems. And so I think often we get lost in the technical side of the system and how, so really the chapter is about, social technical systems, right? And it's digging into that social side a bit more, because I think what happens on the social side drives a lot of what happens on the technical side. And I've always been more interested in how people work to solve technical problems than how to actually solve technical problems.
Okay, I can respect that, but if we focus on safety too, focusing on what goes right, and if we're attracted to technical parts of problems and we do technical stuff better, then shouldn't we focus on the technical aspect and try to remove the socio part?
Yeah, that is a conundrum. I think that actually is an often taken perspective that I've been trying to figure out how to sort of shed some light on the fact that that's just not a thing. People are always going to be operating those like systems at some level, and so why try to remove the people? In the inverse of that is embrace the people and how they interact with the system, because if you ignore them, you're letting you're not engineering that part of the system, and I think that there is real engineering that can be done on the social side of the system.
So you want to engineer the people for greater precision. I respect that. Can we dive into one of the other case studies? The one where people rotated on teams. Can you set us up for that? Describe the background there and what you were looking for?
I work for a company here in Minneapolis, SportsEngine. We were acquired by NBC Sports in 2016. So we've been a part of a large corporation for a while now. But prior to that, we were just sort of a scrappy startup that was, trying to succeed. And one of the things that we dealt with was, we only had the ability to hire so many people, right? We can't hire an infinite number of engineers. And so we were, as an operations team, so I lead the platform operations team. At the time, I was just a senior engineer on the team, but we were trying to figure out how we could increase capacity with that team without actually hiring anyone, was sort of the constraint we were stuck within. And we're looking at, the 4 other product teams throughout the organization. And we're realizing that, it could be beneficial to them to have some of the skills that we have within our team. And so we started talking about how we could do this sort of rotational program. It was an idea that I like many of my other ideas stole from somewhere else. The Etsy bootcamp idea is a variation of what I'm talking about, where at Etsy, when you were hired in, you would go spend several months or whatever on another team to get up to speed, and then you would go back to your actual team that you would then work on. So then you had built this relationship with this other team, and you could use that relationship, whether you were their sort of communication person to that central team or whatever it was, but you had built a relationship outside of your team. And so we attempted that. We picked a person from each of those 4 teams. They would spend what started as 2 weeks and ended up going to a month because the 2 weeks wasn't very long. But they would spend 2 weeks on our team, and do the work of an engineer on our team, and we would spend time training them like we would any other new hire, to teach them how to do what we do, and that would rotate through to each member from the various different teams. We got some interesting things out of it, like we needed some sort of product development work that we were doing to build a deployment system. And so we got, Ruby engineers that knew how to work on Rails app out of it. And so what we did was combine that like expertise and sort of operational problems along with that sort of like back end web development expertise, which was a pretty cool outcome. Like all things, it has a trade off, right? And to come back to the failure, I think this one is a little more concrete in that. Each of those teams loses an engineer for a period of time. We sort of gain a full-time engineer, but they lose an engineer for a month a year.
I'm sorry, Andy. Hello, today I'd like to talk to you about Meter's Peanut Brittle. It's a great national favorite, made with only the choicest peanuts from September through May. Ask for Meter's Peanut Brittle at a confectionery establishment near you. Okay, sorry, Andy, as you're saying, we got to do the sponsor bits.
I like peanut brittle. You were talking about an idea that you stole from John Allspaw.
Yes, yes, indeed. Sorry, now I'm thinking about salty nut rolls. Yeah, that's a Minnesotan thing. So I definitely prefer salty nut rolls from peanut brittle, but
that sounds delicious. Yeah, maybe you could get us some, James. Make yourself useful.
We've talked about this, Casey, several times. Just talked about this. It's not what I do. It's not what I do here, and you keep doing this in front of the guests, and it's awkward. So when we're kind of doing chaos engineering, and we're trying to make this happen in an organization, Andy, what are some misconceptions that people have around chaos engineering? As you're trying to deal with this.
Yeah, I think people focus. They focus on the part of the experiment that is supposed to give you the signals of what's wrong with the organization, right? So to come back to that signals bit that we were talking about earlier, I think the most interesting part of chaos engineering is the experiment is designed to sort of give you an understanding of the system, right? So like the first step is getting the steady state, and so the work to understand the steady state is actually one of the most important pieces. Nora describes that in her chapter really, really well about the beginning of the experiment. And that work actually pays off even if you don't do the experiment. And I think that's the part that people miss, is that the work to decide what experiment to do and how to actually do it is some of the most valuable work you can do. Because you have limited resources, you have limited time, so you have to pick things that will make an impact.
So if you work on doing the work to do the work, you might not have to actually do the work to get the benefit from it. Could you tell us a little bit more about, so you've run experiments on so-called humans. Have you noticed any patterns in humanoid behavior? If somebody were to create the rule of Andy or Fleener's rule, what would that rule say?
I never quite agree on the value of a thing, because I'm always looking at the trade-offs that are being made, and in any given situation, there's going to be it's thoroughness efficiency trade-off, right? So you can spend more time or less time on a particular thing, but you're making a trade-off to do that.
The exception to that rule being consensus or fiat, just having everybody agree with you where there is no trade-off.
That's a familiar model for you, Casey.
in the book, it seems like you almost have a pathological interest in Westrum's models of culture. Do you think that, for example, how strong do you think that model is? Do you think an organization can cleanly fit in the generative, bureaucratic, or pathological category? And you mentioned earlier leadership as an emergent property. Do you think that's perhaps only applies to one of those categories, like a generative organization, whereas it's an explicit property of a or even a bureaucratic organization?
Yeah, I think that's actually one of the things that I sort of struggled with in writing the chapter. Was I was sort of fighting with this idea that the Westrum model clearly has its flaws, because I don't think any organization fits 100% into any of those categories. But I do think it gives you some indications, some signals, right? There's some strong signals about where if you were to plot it on a line, where they would fit. And if you were at this end where it was the pathological, and this is the generative end, like it needs, you need to be past the bureaucratic end, probably, right? If that's in the middle, you need to be past that to start to see the value of experimentation, because there's just too much friction to experiment unless you can go hyper local with the way you have a sort of cultural bubble, right? And I think organizations are built that way, in that we could call them silos, or we can call them team culture versus department culture versus organizational culture. And I think your ability to make an impact, it probably depends on the sort of shape of that.
I'm starting to get that vibe, that the Fleener's law. I'm really interested in models like that help explain human behavior. One of my favorites is the Cobra rule, that says that highlights examples where measures taken to improve system safety actually end up making the system less safe. So I'm always on the lookout for models like that. In fact, there's an extension to that called Gerard's rule, which is that it's basically built on top of Cobra's rule, where an attempt to make the system safer actually backfires, and this happened in Philadelphia back in the day with Gerard, who he dug tunnels from the Delaware River to mid-northern part of the city to get around customs, right? So customs was there as the regulation to make stuff safer. He builds tunnels and brings in contraband, and really started organized criminal behavior there. So it backfired, but then Gerard's law extends that principle by saying then after the fact, people decide that in fact it was a good thing after all, right? And that the lack of safety in the system outweighed the benefit, because Gerard, after the fact, became a philanthropist in his older years. And there's now a Gerard College in northern Philadelphia. In fact, we did something similar there, and prohibition is a great example of this. We did something similar there in your neck of the woods, in just on the northeast side of the river there. We dug a tunnel to a bar called the Town Pump to get. I wasn't holding the shovel or anything, but we, could get things past the watchers that way. I think it's called the Yacht Club now. I don't know if you've ever been there.
Sure, yeah.
But yeah, great example of rules put in place with the intention of making a system safer, in this case, curbing alcoholism, but ends up having the opposite result, backfires, and amplifies in this case, alcoholism and organized criminal behavior. Again, not that I've ever been part of organized crime.
A great story, Casey, from your life that you've lived. Andy, what's your favorite Keanu Reeves movie?
Ooh, favorite Keanu Reeves movie? That's a tough one. There's a lot of good ones. The one that popped in my head first was Bill and Ted, the original Bill and Ted.
I was thinking you would say that with the Westrum's model and kind of like be excellent to each other type of thing. Yeah, right on. Okay.
Is this a pop culture reference? James, I hate the pop culture references. I don't.
I know. Sometimes I throw them in there just for that reason.
Hmm.
All right, let's open up the lines and bring in a caller for you, Andy.
Hi, Andy. Longtime listener, Bridget Krumhout, first-time caller. So, you're on a mission for DevOps Days Minneapolis in an exciting AU where we go places and do things. You need to round trip between downtown Minneapolis and downtown St. Paul at the height of rush hour. What factors are you considering, like traffic, route, and mode of transport? And how could you attempt to solve this optimally with and without a personal car while guarding against unknown unknowns? I'll take my answer offline.
Ooh, that is an excellent question. Yeah, guarding against unknown unknowns, that's sort of impossible. But for me, I'm gonna take the light rail. I'm not gonna drive, that's for sure.
Okay, yeah, Andy, that was our only caller. But Casey, I think you have one more question.
Yeah, I have a few more questions about the chapter, about this chapter in particular, actually. So in your section, all you need is altitude and direction.
Why don't people just go and buy the book?
And that concludes our show. Please visit us on the YouTube using your Netscape or your AOL or whatever you normally use, and subscribe to our channel there. For recording of this broadcast, as well as all the previous ones and show notes as well, visit us on chaos.community/broadcast. Until then, we'll see you next time. Ending transmission now.